could see things bubbling and how our voice was being dismissed almost.
James Bond, Idris Elba, Lashana Lynch, Tom Hiddleston. Does it have to be a man? Does it have to be a woman? Where do we stand?
I don't know. I like James Bond. For me, my James Bond was Pierce Brosnan, because he was also in Mrs. Doubtfire. I don't know, that's just... I was born in the 90s, so for me, it was Pierce Brosnan. But now I'm like, ugh, you know, like just pick one and let him retire, you know.
I tapped out on James Bond after Roger Moore. Do you know Roger Moore?
I didn't even.
Yeah, like he was my James Bond, and then I tapped out on James Bond. I haven't been invested. So Pierce Brosnan, I something about Pierce Brosnan. I'm not sorry, Melissa, but something about Pierce, I'm just not feeling, and I haven't felt, and that's why I didn't invest in the James Bond when he was there, and I just haven't picked it up since.
James Bond is well, 007 is an agent number, basically. So it can be anybody, male or female, black or white. And I think as we're moving towards an era where we are changing the face of the people we see on TV and in movies, is it not important for young people to see that that is yet another thing that they can be?
I don't think that they should. I think people should write roles for those people, rather than we're now having a situation where James Bond was written as a white man who has these specific qualities. Like if you have a character in your story that you write who's got potentially your dad, if someone who was then a white woman came and played your dad, you'd be a bit like, well, how's that gonna quite work? Because I specifically wrote this character for this genre of person. So I think there should be other characters in the script that might be as strong as James Bond, or potentially other movies like The Woman King that come up and rise with strong black female characters or strong white male characters, whatever it may be.
I agree partly with that, I would say. I don't know, maybe someone can illuminate our minds here. James Bond, does he have like a backstory? Do we know his mum and dad? Do we know any of that?
Well, based on his characteristics, I would assume he's gone to a posh British public school, because he strikes me as being quite entitled. He strikes me as being this he has this sense of absolute authority about him or so. He doesn't take things lightly when it doesn't go his own way, and thankfully he's got a license to kill to back it up. But do you know who I think would be good as James Bond? Because I think in this age of diversity and things changing and everything else, so I think that we should just flip the script altogether. Who I would love to see as James Bond is Lorenz Tate, who who's most famous as Doughboy in Menace to Society, or Morris Chestnut, or someone like that. I just want somebody who's like, not just, Idris Elba would be delighted for him or so, but I would love to see Lorenz Tate just bring a bit of Doughboy into James Bond or so get some thug in some James Bond or so a little bit. Let's give it a bit rough around the edges.
But I suppose it's how far the script writers want to go, isn't it? How dangerous they want to be in regarding the changing of the script and the identity of 007. I'm not sure they want to take that leap. I think there's a safe option and there's that thuggerish option that makes James totally different to where we started.
Yeah.
And are we as a generation, well, I'm beyond, I'm the other side, but ready for that, which I think could be quite radical. I think it'd be good. We'll see him in a different light. And we potentially, you may see me invest in it again.
Yeah.
But I think it's really radical. So we also have to talk about the people behind the person. So those that write the scripts, you know, who are they? Are they ready to invest in something slightly different than the kind of narrative that has been written for James Bond for a number of years?
Here's my issue with that. If you look at the Q, for example, to whom James Bond reports, it was a man for a long time, and then it was played by Judi Dench. No one batted an eyelid. And yeah, when there is a suggestion that James Bond could be a woman, Everyone says, oh, there's a problem. And I think as time goes on, and James Bond, I think in the last couple of movies, what they've done, they've deliberately described him as a relic, almost like a Timex watch in a digital age. Yeah. And so I think if you are trying to evolve the character, why can you not have someone who's a woman? Why can you not have someone who's a man? Why can you not have someone who's not from a privileged background? Because you would imagine
I think it just feels like a tick boxing exercise. That's the problem. People would just see it as them trying to fulfill a diversity quota rather than trying to fit. If someone has the exact qualities that James Bond might embody, like Idris Elba, he could be a good idea because he's kind of the dominant male guy, or maybe Kwasi Kwarteng because he went to a private school, but like it needs to be someone who has those qualities, in my opinion, just for the plot. Like you can't just put people in there just because they fit a box or because they have a specific like phenotype of how they look.
Why can't you? Because it's this day of diversity. Diversity pays. Flip the script. Do something different. Take a risk.
But even
take a
Idris,
risk or so. Do something very different. Because the key thing about it is that you might surprise yourself. Because let's not play around here. If it can do numbers, if it makes money, it makes sense. Yeah. And the reality of the matter is that you throw Lorenz Tate in there or so, for the matter, it's almost like a bit like charging to see a train wreck. Because people will stop and just say, I just want to take a stare.
The reason why I asked what is his background is because to me, he's just a character. He could have walked out of a door for all we care, you know? So at the end of the day, it shouldn't really matter if he becomes a black man down the line. Maybe he went Michael Jackson with it, you know? At the end of the day, it's our imagination.
See the British public, they care.
They care. I think that's it. It's part of the British, it's the Aston Martin. It's the British public school system. It's MI, whatever, MI5, MI6 or so.
But Idris Elba is high up there. He's well favoured. I think the British public is ready for that, to be honest.
But I think the key thing here is that the latent thing that we're not really speaking about, that the thing that we're whispering about but screaming about at the same time is the matter of race. That James Bond is quintessentially the white British male export around the world. So, and that.
Do you think it could be a woman as well, or not?
I think that it's just a similar risk. It's as much crazy a risk as throwing a woman in there as throwing Lorenz Tate or Morris Chestnut or Idris Elba in there. Also, don't get me wrong, Idris Elba will probably be the closest thing to that. He's suave, he's in good shape, he looks great, he's quintessentially English or British or whatever you want to call it, so Sierra Leonean. He conveys everything that you could potentially want in an actor. He's probably much more accomplished an actor than most of the actual actors who actually portrayed Bond. But I think essentially the quietly whispered thing around this table is that Bond is a white man wants to see Bond in his Aston Martin. That's what they wanted to be like. So for Bond to look like me, to look like the three of us around here, or the two of you or anybody else or so, right, it would alienate almost Bond's key demographic. And I love it. I want it to happen.
I mean, Daniel Craig said that it shouldn't be a woman. He outright said, I don't think Bond should be a woman because this character was not written for a woman. But it's interesting because I think you're right, you can kind of transcend a bit more easily into the Idris Elba type than into the female type.
Was Daniel Craig the first? Sorry, please.
No.
Was who's Daniel Craig to talk? Wasn't he the first blonde Bond or so? When he became Bond, or so, that was controversial too. So, I say it's the time of diversity. Flip the table over. Do something dangerous. Live a little.
I was just going to say, when you go to the cinema or when films are created, it's for our imagination, you know, to feed our imagination. So when people are like, oh no, it can't be like that, so restrictive, I feel like it's just killing it, isn't it? Because it defeats the whole purpose of why films are made in the first place. Someone thought that up, someone used their imagination. So to go into the cinema and be like, oh no, I expect to see a white man, you didn't write the script, you know? You should just take what they give you, really, at the end of the day.
But the paying public will the way that they think about it will be, if it doesn't, we go back to the ching ching, the cash. Yeah. If it doesn't ching ching at the end of it, that will be the end. That'd be the end of the story.
Kerching, don't you?
Kerching, ching ching. No, that's my pocket. Sorry.
So Lorenz Tate. Yep. Idris Elba. Yeah.
I haven't got one. Like I said, I tapped out at James.
Same
Roger
at
Moore.
Pierce Brosnan. Yeah.
So Roger Moore, Pierce Brosnan. You can tell how old we are.
You mentioned the queue, and it's safe now to talk about Black history.
Is it? I know people who got cancelled yesterday, but then
we'll get to that because it was quite striking in October to see so many journalists in particular express their concern about being suffocated by some of the organisations now that are trumpeting their Black History Month credentials and their solidarity. Where do we stand on that? Is it safe? Do you feel safe? I'll start with you.
So I haven't messaged him yet, but I did see they posted something yesterday, and I tried to wonder whether we could organise something to support him. But Kanye Andrews, of course, is an academic, respected academic. Is pretty much the leading light on Black studies in Britain. Also, he's founded the first Black Studies course in Britain. He's an anti-racist. He's a man of history and a man who knows what he's talking about, what he's doing, as you would expect. So when the Queen died, I said, rest in, what I always do with certain characters, with certain people or so, if I don't want to say anything or so, but I just want to, when somebody dies, you just say, God rest their soul, and comfort their family. And that's the polite thing that I would probably do in that situation. And even doing that, a lot of people just unfollowed me right there and then. And I could understand why. Because deep down, I think that I probably would have been them a couple of years ago too. And maybe I'm still them a little bit today, because again, it depends on how objectionable you consider the institution to be, and maybe how much you know about the history and how much you want to acknowledge about the history. Kanye knows a lot about the history. Kanye did what you would expect Professor Kanye Andrews to do, which is to take a stand and tell the history as it is and the impact it's had on Black people, or the children of Africa, children of African Caribbean descent in particular, so, which has been transformatively decimating, essentially, in terms of when you're actually looking at it, so that if you're calculating in terms of 9/11 terms or so, you're looking at 1 million plus 9/11s happening to Black people by the hands of various European institutions, the royal family being one of them. We saw what happened, the Queen dies. Immediately there's this rush to, you're forced almost into mourning, that the nation you're basically made to mourn. And some of it became fairly comedic, truth be told. Some of it, originally you had Hugh Edwards on BBC leading the morning, then the international media comes on. But then when you're listening to pretty much right the way down to local BBC radio, and you're hearing the local BBC journalist trying his best to emote, and then you can tell you've just not got the words for this because you don't really know what you're doing. So, but I'll wrap up what I'm saying now, I'll land in a moment. But the key thing here is that it was a unique moment in our history as British people, but it was also a dishonest moment in our history as British people, because when moments like that happen, or so, I suppose when people die, the only thing you do at a funeral is that you can only speak good of the dead, and that's universal thing. But this is beyond just a person dying. This was actually a reflection on an institution. And that reflection on the institution was, we weren't really given space to really speak about it. There was almost that immediate continuity. The Queen is dead, long live the King. And that's pretty much where we found ourselves right now. But for Black people, this was a critical moment for us to really reflect on our history in this nation, in relation to this institution, in relation to everything that's happened to us over the last 500 years. There was no space for that whatsoever.
Because in a moment, in a way, it's not Black history, it's history.
Yeah.
But we only saw one context of that history, and that was the context of the indigenous population, if you like, of the UK. But did you guys feel suffocated at all last month?
I was
did you feel you had to stay
expecting it.
silent?
I mean, hello, of course that was going to happen. There was no chance that people were going to be quiet about the Queen dying. So totally expected it. I just removed myself from it, I think that was the only thing that you could have done, really. I wasn't mourning. I mean, it's sad if anyone dies, for me personally, and I kind of really like old people as well, so that makes it even sadder for me. But I wasn't mourning, but I also didn't really feel the need to kind of talk about Black history in that moment, because it was just like, it's only throwing gasoline onto a very sensitive situation. I don't know.
I think it's a bit like when people talk about abolition of the monarchy during the mourning period, or like when I saw people campaigning outside, but during that period I was like, well, where were you 2 weeks ago? Like, why are we talking about this at this time when a family is in grief, like someone has lost their mum? And obviously, I know like the monarchy supported Captain John Hawkins, who brought African slaves over and things like that, but that was in the 1500s, and the institution is undeniably racist. Absolutely, that can't be denied. But then so are most institutions in the UK, and you don't see us saying, oh, let's abolish the clothing industry, because that probably still has slaves involved. So I don't think that it's all about abolition because you disagree with how something has happened in the past. I think it's about reform. I don't know, I haven't seen too much about what the Queen has done herself. I didn't see her as making any massively racist gestures or anything like that. King Charles has said that he recognises the devastation that the slave trade brought across, and he's done quite a lot for climate change. And I also think anyone who wants to abolish the monarchy has a lot of faith in democracy, and I don't have that faith.
Why not?
Because I think sometimes across the world you see that people are actually people have better leaders when they're in autocracies sometimes than in democracies. I think it's all about people.
Can you give us an example of that?
Like, for example, in Thailand with King Bhumibol, the whole of the Thai population loved him. The country went into mourning for an entire year after he died, and it was incredible. I was actually there at the time when the country was in mourning, and it was incredible to see how long the country mourned for, whereas ours was like a period of maybe tops 2 weeks. They had a full year.
Thailand?
Yeah, I guess it was. Well, was it forced here though? It was more
Yeah, I
like
think
Here,
the
do you know,
media, you know?
Here it is. Here it's a very different thing, because here it's the iron fist in a velvet glove type of forcing. In other countries, it's iron glove or iron fist type of forcing. So over here, you're essentially, even when you look at it, when the people who were
Is there a
protesting.
difference, by the way?
In terms of over here.
Is there a difference between the iron fist in the velvet glove?
Yep.
And the iron fist in the iron glove?
It's perception. It's perception. It's perception. It's the threat feels a lot softer. Versus, it's almost like the threat is psychological as opposed to the threat being immediately physical, that you're going to feel pain, as opposed to when you see the actual. So even when you saw the protesters, for example, some of the protesters are inherently going to be rude. They're there to disrupt the natural order of things in order to make a particular point. But this is Britain, and people protest every single day. And for somebody to take objection, as somebody did, in very, very rude terms, in a period of mourning, but for them to be arrested is one thing. For them to be arrested and charged is completely un-British.
I just want to stick, if I can, with this area, the area that affects all of you guys, because you write, you speak, you're in the public domain. I know a colleague of ours, Nadine White, an exceptional colleague of ours, she wrote a terrific piece about the concern she felt, and she almost articulated what I thought of that period, that people couldn't give any context to what they were seeing if they were black.
No chance. No chance. We couldn't. And that's why I stayed away from social for a good period of time, because I think anything that I may have, because of obviously what I speak about every single day of my life, which is about the racism and the discrimination that exists in football, I felt that there were people waiting for me to make a comment of what they felt was derogatory towards, the royal family, to then almost try and dismiss me from any conversation after then. And when I say dismiss, I actually mean let's finish him off, let's cancel it. I don't like using cancel, to be totally honest, but it's the best for who's going to be watching. And I purposely stayed away for 4 or 5 days, even though I could see things bubbling and how our voice was being dismissed almost. Anything you said was, well, this is about the Queen. We need to mourn the Queen, and you couldn't give any context to the story. The way that it's been delivered to us, and the way that our forefathers and foremothers have felt, and how we've been dismissed in that conversation.
And just to add to what you're saying, Troy, I mean, we're not talking about generations in the distant past.
No.
We're talking about grandparents we would have had in the
Absolutely.
30s, the 40s,
Absolutely.
the 50s, the 60s.
But are we surprised, Is anyone surprised?
I'm not surprised, no. But I just wanted to give some kind of context to why for 5, 6, 7 days, and everyone knows me, I use my social quite a lot, that I wanted to step away. Because one, I also didn't want the energy that was going on, and it was a lot of negative energy. I didn't want that impacting on me. And if it impacts on me, it impacts on loved ones around me. So I actually just stepped away to save myself almost, because as Darren knows, I can get invested in a conversation. And if I get invested in a conversation, I'm losing, by the way. I ain't leaving it until I start getting ahead. So actually, I just felt it was the right thing to do at the right time.
What would speaking your truth have looked like?
Speaking my truth is always me knowing my space, knowing what's around, knowing the atrocities that have existed in and around me for people that look like me, that want to work in my industry, that play in my industry, that entertain in my industry. So actually, if you broaden it out, it mirrors everyone's experience. You know, going into their workplace environment or going into spaces where they're the only one, you know, and how we get judged, how we get looked at, how we get referred to, the whispers and all that kind of stuff. And for me, it was just a time where you acknowledge a passing. Of course we do. Like you said, you acknowledge that, because I didn't, but it's kind of like the right thing to do almost.
Yeah.
But I don't want the rest that comes with it, and I didn't want the rest that came with it.
Trevor Sinclair, for example, so when Trevor pretty much gave his actual fairly valid opinion, or Anya Uju, who's an American academic of Igbo Nigerian descent, whose people were basically, they faced, I wouldn't call it genocide, but over 1 million of them were killed from 1967 to 1970 during the Biafran War. The purpose of that war was to extract themselves from this colonial construct called Nigeria, where they never asked to be part of, they no longer wanted to be part of, but Britain wanted them to stay there. So therefore Britain actually armed and made sure the Nigerian state won in order to ward off influence of, say, the Russians and the French. But the broader issue is this, is that one thing that really jumped off the page to me during this whole period, and you've reflected, and we've pretty much been reflecting around the table, from our perspective, say from a predominantly black perspective, as well as from even a white British perspective, even the journalists who are professional communicators, no one could really articulate what they were really mourning, because it just seemed as if they were talking about as a religious figure.
Well,
and it was almost as if that
she seemed that way, isn't she?
So you're suggesting that okay, but yeah, it did feel like it, because it was almost as if you're talking about a god.
Because it comes God, her, and I think is it the state or something like that.
Yeah, but even then too, truth be told, I've never really, and I think
She's
I'm
divine.
but I've never really understood the idea when I listen to our national anthem, God save our gracious king, our king or queen or so. I've never really understood it, because I always thought, even as a little boy, I used to think to myself, what about the rest of us? Are we not important?
I used to think that as well.
Yeah, I used to think there was something wrong with me in thinking that. I used to think that, hold on, but what about the rest of us here? That, so, but I just want to say one final thing about King Charles. So you go back to the Queen. If you go back to the Queen Elizabeth II, during her reign, Britain committed some serious atrocities, particularly in Kenya, in which Britain conducted atrocities that were not dissimilar to what the Nazis were doing around in other places too. In fact, I'll just focus on that. But that's a bold statement to make, but it's historically true. Complete with concentration camps. But then, when you then bore down to, of course, Iraq too, and everything else too, which is very, very contemporary. I was only in my 20s when Iraq happened, which wasn't that long ago. And then, but then when you then fast forward to now, and you look at King Charles, I'm going to say something controversial. I'm a bit more keen on King Charles than I was actually Queen Elizabeth II. And I'm a bit more keen on him because he took a strong stance against the Rwanda plan, which I felt was just absolutely a red line of fascism in Britain that was really being jumped over pretty quickly by leveraging the identities of ethnic minority home secretaries or so to push through this very, very serious compound racism upon racism. And he came about and called it appalling. And he was slaughtered in the press. If you remember, prior to him becoming king, on places like GB News, they were calling him the Clown Prince. They were revealing things about he received like a check or so for $1 million. So he was being slaughtered because it all happened after he took that position. That's all faded away right now, and all the stories you probably never heard about them because he ascended to king, and he's now treated a lot more respect of the charm conveyed him, the charm of the throne is now conveyed upon him. But I do think that him taking a stance on, say, climate change, him taking a stance on the Rwanda plan in particular, for me as a black man in Britain, I'm grateful for that.
Ooh, I don't know, I don't want to, come
That's
for
what
the
you're
king.
here to do.
But I feel like he does take a stance on a lot of different things. Yeah. And does he really believe the stances that he's taking? When was it? Like 2 months ago, he was the editor of The Voice. I don't know if you remember that.
He was editor of Voice. That was his last job before he became king of England.
That's
social mobility in Britain in action.
But Black History Month. Yeah. King Charles, where are you at? I haven't heard anything.
Oh, they'll be there. There'll be something there.
When's he going to say
There'll be a party that day. You'll see Darren in his black tie and Buckingham Palace before he does it.
So he's supposed to not say anything political now, though.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, there will definitely be something at the palace. I have no doubt about it.
Are you invited?
No, I'm not. Although I must point out, Queen Elizabeth II did invite me to the palace. I did go to the garden party.
Oh, you did? It's all coming out.
And I'll say one thing too. The nicest royals to me were Eugenie and Beatrice. They were the ones who came over. So Meghan, all of them were all there also, and William and Kate, and the only two people who came over. So the norm is when you get there, they tell you to stand in one particular place. You cannot move from that place. Well, you can move from that place, but a certain place you can't go into, because that's just for the rich and wealth and everything else. But then you then got us commoners, and then Eugenie and Beatrice come over and say hello to you.
But that's the thing, he was called an ally, right, in the Voice newspaper, and you say now he's the king, he can't say anything political, but he's been very active on his social media. I think he met with, I think there were soldiers in Asia somewhere. He's been doing stuff, he's said stuff.
So are you a fan of the king and his allegiance to black people?
I don't think he has one. Maybe he should prove us wrong.
Former editor of The Voice.
Who?
King Charles.
Oh, I don't think, I'm just waiting for the Black History
What did you
Month.
think of that then?
Oh, what about him editing The Voice? I mean, I think that, look, you guys want me to come for the king. This is
We want you to hail the king.
Can you put a disclaimer underneath that says she really adores the king, and please don't take this out of context. But I think that, you know, the royal family, we saw what happened with Meghan Markle.
Indeed.
I think they should be making an active effort to show people that they, you know, they do care about black people. But I think the fact that they're not is saying a lot.
You touched very quickly, and I do want to move on very briefly. I hadn't intended to ask you guys about this, but I do want to ask about Meghan Markle and what we think of the treatment very quickly around the table.
That's probably where I was just going. How can we say that they support black people when they have someone within their own a kind of family, the way that they've treated her? And people will say, well, no, the way that they've treated her, you know, and
let me just add to that, because Prince William and Kate Middleton talking about World Mental Health Day, and everybody knows about the impact that the last couple of years have had on Meghan, particularly during that period where she was pregnant as well. So, Troy.
No, I'm just, listen, I find it difficult to invest in the conversation because of the treatment. And I find it difficult to invest in the conversation because of the way that some of the media have spun the treatment as well. And have literally, they've done as much damage as what the royal family have to her. And they've portrayed it in a way, honestly, that it's almost like she's a devil woman. And I just can't understand. Listen, mental health has been a thing for a very long time. I know people are focused on the last 3 years, but we've been talking about mental health for a very long time, and it gets ignored at certain periods of time. It's almost as if it's forced. She can't have mental health. You know, she won't be impacted by these stories because she's privileged. It's obvious that many people didn't want her to be part of that royal family, and even breed children. And there's children now that are going to be part of that royal family. There's now a legacy, and I think that is creating a massive issue for the royalists, for the people who believe that the Queen and the family and now the King should all be white, traditional white, and there's nothing that could take them away from that opinion and that view. And so I stopped. Listen, I'm not really a royalist anyway, but you see when someone whose colour is slightly different to the norm, the way they've been treated, especially as a woman as well, and as a woman, then I can't invest that energy to support.
But I mean, I do think that in a way, there's this phrase that I always think of that's if we all went to bed and then tomorrow we woke up and we all weren't racist, then the world would still be racist because the institutions that we have are racist. And so I think a lot of it might not be down to the individual people within the royal family, because I didn't see the Queen as an evil person herself. I don't think she would have actively potentially wanted to hurt Meghan. Maybe she did. To be fair, we don't know the ins and outs of the family dynamics, and I think it's really interesting that the whole world is commenting on it when we really know nothing. And
well, we know that Kate made Meghan cry. We know that, don't we?
do we know?
Yes, we do. We do. It all came out in the end, didn't it? At first, the papers were saying that Meghan made Kate cry, and then finally, when Meghan did the interview with Oprah, she said, "Look, the truth is, Kate made me cry, but she was made out to be a devil throughout that whole period, and no one came out to save her. No one came out to clarify, and she took the hit for that." So we do know the dynamic. I mean, why are you making someone cry?
But I mean, if you see someone cry in public, it's different to what might happen behind closed doors. Like, I think
no, I think it was a
interpersonal-
wedding, something to do with Meghan and Harry's wedding.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong. If you do,
I think you're correct.
yeah. So I think something to do with the bridesmaids, and then Kate made Meghan cry. Don't know what she said to her, but clearly it was not good.
I think that, so overarchingly, and I agree with you, my brother. I think that my issue with it too is that, so in me actually having positive things to say about the royal family, I'm often having to compartmentalize the Meghan situation and not remember it. Because the moment I do, I think to myself, nah. You know what I mean? I think to myself, nah. You know what? Because it's always the same way, just like, nah, this and I think that has come back to haunt them a little bit. So when you saw Kate and William in, say, Jamaica, for example, where they thought they'll get treated like royalty, they were just treating that like absolutely. Celine Dion gets treated a lot better. I'll get treated better than that if I go to Jamaica tomorrow. And I think that was the issue that's happened here, that they took essentially a opportunity for 1,000 years to extend your rule, essentially your reign for 1,000 years or so. And I hate to speak in such terms, but to extend your rule of perpetuity and really make you warm in the hearts of black people and everything else, and scuppered it, essentially, and almost destroyed the Commonwealth, amongst other things too.
Rupert Huck called Kwasi Kwarteng superficially black. So, what do we think of that? And have any of you, been called superficially black in some way, shape or form? Maybe not the exact words, but clearly from Rupert Huck's point of view, she said a guy who speaks articulately, has a good schooling, is intelligent, is superficially black. I know you've spoken about this. I want to stick with you, if I can, if she doesn't chop your leg off.
No, I kicked your water over. I'm so sorry. I think that, so for me, I've had a very, very interesting experience with this. So I think there's two ways of looking at this. There's the implied notion. I think Rupert was trying to tap into something that may inherently be true, but she said it in the wrong way. Yeah. The idea that he's superficially black by virtue of the fact that he's went to a good school, or actually of merit, truth be told, he actually got in there a scholarship and everything else. He's a very well-read man, Mr. Kwarteng, Kwasi Kwarteng is. That he pretty much, he speaks in an articulate manner, as we all do around this table. He's pretty well educated, as we all are around this table. He pretty much, in terms of the superficial stuff, he's pretty much, actually fairly much the norm, dare I say, of most black people that I know. And maybe it's the horrible circles that I keep, yourselves included. But I think the broader thing that she tried to point out was in relation to his politics. Do you know what? I have been called something like that in the past. I've spoken about being called uppity or so in terms of my presentation of speaking or so, but I have been called the C word that ends with an N that rhymes with spoon. Yeah, I've been called. No, but I must point out something. I don't think I was called it by a black person, and it didn't come from a bad place, and it actually changed my life. For it wasn't before, to be completely and bluntly honest with you, I was playing the game. What do you mean? By that I mean that I was pandering in the world that I was, at the time I was a banker, in the world that I was in at that particular time, I was doing the same old thing that anybody else would do. You're trying to get to the top. I was saying what needed to be said or so, all sorts of other bits and bobs, whatever needed to be done or so, whoever needed to be thrown under the actual bus, normally minorities though, I was that man you could have been tapped on the shoulder and just said, hey, could you come along and just do? They could bank on me to do that sort of stuff. I could have been your Kwasi Kwarteng or your Suella Braverman or anybody else or Sean Bailey or anything else right now, because I knew deep down that in that set of behaviour, at the end of that set of behaviour lies immense reward. That if you go back hundreds of years, reward for me personally, but communal punishment, or communal suffering. So, and it's a behaviour that goes back hundreds plus years. And it's somebody that said to me, somebody just sat down to me, somebody I love just said to me that, dude, this is who you are, essentially. This is who you are, so that you're playing all this game one for another, that you've got to take a long, hard look at yourself and accept it, that you're playing the game as you call it or so, or we have different words for it. I don't want to soil the actual panel with the actual words, but you're playing the game, you use it, you're doing everything else. So when somebody calls you that, don't think that they're actually insulting you. They're just describing the actions that you have actually chosen to perform. And it made me take a long, hard look at myself and realize that actually, no, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that. Also, and it made me then question to myself again too, that what's really in it for me? What do I really stand to profit out of whatever peppercorns I get from here? And then when I walk in the room, people just turn silent. Or when I walk in the room, you can feel disgust from my own people. Are you with me? And I was an enlightened guy. I was somebody who actually, I did all that sort of stuff because I knew that this would earn me reward on the other side of things. So I think what Rupert Huck's actual action and the critique that came with it was somewhat misguided, because there's a broader conversation that needs to be had. So if you go inside, look, I've shot up pretty quickly in my previous career. I did quite well for myself in my career in banking, and it's not a coincidence. I'll give you another example. When I joined the media, I'm not going to mention the name of the organization, but I'll call it Blacks Be Careful for short, right? So then, so I was working one day. A man taps me on the shoulder and says to me, and I was working pretty much at a very senior level there. I'll try and wrap this up pretty quickly, Darren, because it's the first time I've ever speaking about this. And this guy just calls me over and he just says to me, can you come join me for a meeting? I've got a particular issue of member of staff. Can you come along with me? And I was new there, you know it is, you're trying to prove yourself, trying to get on, you're trying to get up, you're trying to get in, you're trying to get on, you're trying to get up. Those are the three career steps, three career dilemmas of anybody. And I was in, I was now trying to get up, essentially. And I was doing quite well for myself. Senior man calls me over and says to me, can you come along to me with this meeting to me? And I get there, and it's pretty much almost like I'll describe it as a working somebody out of the business meeting. And it was a black guy there, who was probably about 5-6 years younger than me. And as I was there, he looked up and I made eye contact with him, and I immediately knew I was invited to the meeting. I immediately knew, I knew what my role was in the meeting. So my role was basically to provide ethnic cover for the bullying of this man out of business. And I walk inside there and I see this guy there, and I can almost see him somewhat trembling a little bit, because he could tell the role I was going to provide. And then suddenly, boss man, white male boss man, comes along, starts to speak a little bit here and there. And then in my gut instinct, I thought to myself, this is my shot. I can pretty much just throw this guy under the bus and I'm off to the races from here in this business. But part of me just said, no, I'm not going back to that again. I'm not doing that again. I'm not doing it. So right there and then, the moment the guy just started to articulate the issues that were, as he saw it, I just started to take his side. And I started to notice that boss man was getting colder and colder and colder and colder and colder and colder to me. And then at the end of it, so I basically helped this young man articulate the issues from his perspective, that he wasn't attaining the support he deserved, he wasn't attaining the actual direction or anything else. And then we pretty much wrapped up the conversation with the guy walking out to there just with a couple of instructions, but his career is intact. He's still there to this day, he's flourishing, and I'm proud of that right now. But the key thing is that the boss guy never spoke to me again after that day. And it was just, again, it's the racism at play here. It takes place in the corporate world. It takes place in the actual politics too. But the idea that minorities cannot actually do these things, cannot actually earn some sort of reward out of collaborating with racism, which I think is what Rupert was trying to allude to, is a false idea. There's a market for you if you want to collaborate with racism. You can go so unbelievable. You could be Home Secretary in a couple of years before you know it. You could be Trade Secretary. You could be Chancellor of the Exchequer.
But you know, if you don't articulate yourself properly at that particular moment in time,
you're finished.
That is finished.
Yeah,
so
and that's what happened to me.
You mentioned Trevor Sinclair earlier, and Trevor Sinclair, what he wanted to say was actually spot on. What he said left it to debate, which then left it for people to attack him.
I think that moves towards a different debate, and this one is actually about people who can articulate themselves in a way that basically plays to a certain base.
Yeah, pretty much. Look, it's not this is Black History Month, and this is Black history. Essentially, you go back to the old countries. Whether it's Ashanti, Ga, Yoruba, Igbo, Dahomey, Shikiri, Urhobo, anywhere else, so which are the ethnic groups that we all emerge from, or so, from pretty much from the West African coastline. If you go back to them also, there are people who did actually work, some of them under the pain of perish or survive, but there were people who collaborated with race. If you go back to the plantations, it was depicted on countless movies or so, sometimes hilariously and sometimes tragically. If you go watch Django Unchained, you see it there. There's one movie.
The fascinating thing, listening to you,
please,
these two are stunned, and particularly Melissa. But when you were telling that story, Nels.
Because I'm realising I was kind of used the same way. I didn't realise it at the time.
Speak, go on.
It was a colleague of mine where I used to work, and he was getting sacked. But I only realized after he was sacked that the reason why they sacked him wasn't fair.
Yeah.
That he was actually performing better than everybody else on the team. But they called me and they said, Melissa, you know. In fact, the guy at the time, the manager, he used to call me Sidogo. My surname's Sigodo, but he used to call me Sidogo. And listen, it was in a very white area, so this is the type of stuff that you're gonna have to deal with. But he used to always like kind of make fun of my surname, but I didn't take any notice of it at the time. I was much younger as well. Anyway, he invited me into the office. He invited the other guy into the office, and then he was like, right, so I'm gonna have to let you go, da 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 da. And then the guy didn't know that he was being sacked literally that day. And then he was a friend of mine as well, so I was kind of like, oh, this is really bad, like, what do we do? And then anyway, he went upstairs to go and get his stuff, and I was kind of following him, and he was like, oh, did they tell you to follow me? And I was like, no, I'm just coming with you. But yeah, it was really sad because I didn't realize that's why they did it, that they brought me in to kind of make it, yeah.
So here's the thing, I mean, because Braverman, Kwarteng, Priti Patel, there is this illusion of diversity in the Conservative Party, but all of them appear to be in position to impose policies that make life difficult for black and brown people, mixed race people across the country. But Rupa Huq was still wrong, wasn't she?
Absolutely. I think it was really racist what she said. I think it was a clumsy attempt at humour because the whole premise on which like the sting of her joke was built was false, that black people can't be successful or conservative or have different opinions. It kind of rests on the premise that everyone has to be like ideologically the same if you have a certain skin colour, which like not everyone has to agree, and also like race isn't genetic. So most people believe that like there's literally 4 races in the world. Ethnicity is genetic, but four races that appear on the forms are like Latino, black, white, and Asian. And how can people within those 4 categories be genetically similar when there's like over 8 million possible chromosome pairings that can happen when a couple has a child, and then you're expecting that people with the same skin colour are supposed to be genetically in some way similar or ideologically in some way similar? Like you're genetically more similar to someone who lives next door to you in Britain than you are to someone who might look your colour in a different country. And so I think that premise is like first needs to just be like thrown out the window. The fact that people can't disagree. It goes kind of to the Kanye thing as well. Like there's always going to be outliers who don't agree with you, who look like you. Like I don't understand why people think that people who look like them should think the same way.
Let's stick with Kanye because he's a very divisive figure. But should we have sympathy for him? He's talked before about his mental health struggles. Is there a side that we are not appreciating as far as he's concerned?
you didn't get a stab at the last question, so yeah. So.
And look, just before you begin, let's make very clear: none of us condone the tweet that was removed from social media, and I think it's very clear to make that point very early on. Yeah. It was offensive. It was wrong. It was entirely right that it was removed from social media. So let's just make that clear from the outset. But is there an issue as far as Kanye West is concerned?
When you say is there an issue, what angle are you coming from though? I mean, in regards to his mental well-being...
You've talked before about having bipolar.
Yeah. Be kind only exists for a moment in time. So at this time, whether it's the black community, whether it's the white community, whether it's the Asian community, whatever, he is a target, and he's not a target and people are talking about his mental well-being. He's a target and people are talking about what comes out of his mouth. So he has to be responsible for that as well, as far as I'm concerned. And the people around him have. I always worry about the people around him. Are they there or around in these certain situations? Are they there just to get paid? Or are they there actually to look after him and understand him and make sure that he actually, you know, when he is in the public light, make sure that he's almost not adding any controversy to the controversy that always exists.
Okay, let's go around the table fairly quickly on this one because we do have one other subject to take in, but what do we need to know about Kanye West when we consider what his actions are?
I used to think he was I used to really admire him as a free thinker. I used to think that anyone who disrupts the status quo and chooses to be rather than belong is like a huge inspiration of mine. I love anyone like that. But then you can tell now that he's just someone who wants attention, and we're giving it to him. And the whole White Lives Matter t-shirt was clearly just for attention. He hasn't been in the media for a while. Now he just wants people to speak about him. The only thing I was shocked at was when Lauryn Hill's daughter then modelled it. I was very confused by that. But then with Kanye, I really just think like he's a maverick. He's someone who just wants to provoke. He's someone who just wants some media attention, and the whole world is giving him what he wants.
But how is he empowering people to think like him then? Because like you said, that others have worn the t-shirt, they've done it, there's the focus is still on him, but he's empowering people to think like him and act like him.
I don't know what he thinks like though. I don't know whether he has an ideology.
Can I just touch on two really, really brief things? Number one, I met Kanye West when his first album came out. I met him at a club called 10 Rooms. I was at the listening party. I was probably one of about 15 Brits there who was at a listening party. And the guy came from even before his first album came out or anything else. It was pretty clear this guy was a genius. It was pretty clear this guy was somebody who had that very, very unique, really special ability to touch human beings, musically gifted, personality was something very, very different. So it was something different that we see in hip hop. He wasn't the hyper masculine type of person or so. He was just a guy who dropped out of school, who was insecure about that, loved his mum, was religious and everything else. As time has gone on, so his perspectives have actually become quite, dare I say, confused. Because one of the things that I found when he was actually speaking, I saw the Tucker Carlson interview, I saw the other stuff on Twitter, so is that one moment he's speaking in this, he fluctuates between extreme right-wing, far-right conspiracy theory, anti-Semitism, everything, and then the next thing he swings to the most extreme of pro-blackness. Also, he's quoting Claude Anderson. He's speaking of the plight of black people post-slavery and everything else. So the next second he's giving democratic talking points. Next second he's anti-abortion. I just think he's a guy who probably does have some mental health issues. It's quite clearly does. Whether or not, and I think the reason why people do care that he has mental health issues is because we used to love him.
I do think that what Lil Boosie said about him painting his skin white though was bad. When he basically said, because of what you've done, you should just turn white. You don't belong to us anymore. I thought that was out of order.
Do you think Kanye West is dangerous?
Yeah, I think he could be. He has a lot of power because I think I read something recently about how it's like 10 times more difficult to get 1 million Instagram followers than it is to get £1 million. So now that is actually something that has huge capital in our era. And also like in 1997 the election was swung by the Sun newspaper changing its allegiance to Labour, and that swung 500,000 votes. So if that can happen in 1997, then surely Kanye in 2022 can do the same for sure. But I just think that the only way to change that is to bring awareness to the fact that maybe he is just a maverick, or, I mean, nobody has any control over what this guy says. He's like gone off his circle, and sometimes geniuses do end up quite mentally ill because they think so deeply.
The trouble is, when somebody with that power, we all know that there are people who might not have the interests of people who want to fight for equality at heart, who will look at a black influential figure like a Kanye West and say, he says it, so what's your problem?
You know what, the thing is, I don't even want to add my thoughts on him because I think that's precisely the problem. The fact that people talk about him and the media talks about him, I think it's just feeding his ego.
Before we move on to the next subject, just for quickly go around the table very quickly, does it hurt what we are seeing Braverman, Patel, Kwarteng doing right now?
Oh, I'm so over it. I'm so tired of these people. I'm so tired of them. I'm so tired. Yeah.
Yeah, it does hurt because at the end of it all, we're in a dynamic now in which the people who enjoy the most protection from racism are the people who actually help facilitate racism. So when you take a look at it, when Diane Abbott's actually getting slaughtered and everything else, also by the press, by a party, so nobody cares. You with me? Somebody can point out that, okay, Diane Abbott's in that toilet over there crying her eyes out, so journalists go and make fun of her, and that really did happen. Nobody cares, no one loses their job or anything else. But Rupert Huck says something, makes a clumsy attempt at humour, about Kwasi Kwarteng, which the humour itself was so, if she actually did it well and actually said it properly, what she really intended to say, she would have been doing us all a favour. But because she failed to do so properly, she loses her job. So what you said, so I'll just point out, so we're in a very, very interesting conundrum now that the actual anti-racists are the ones who are more likely to be punished for actual racism by virtue of making an honest mistake, whereas people who actually wage serious racism against us will leverage the likes of Suella Braverman, Priti Patel, Kwasi Kwarteng to protect themselves against any comeback also about in relation to their own racism, and it puts us at serious risk.
Melissa.
I was just going to say, I know we've passed the Rupa Huq subject, but is there like a common thing within the black community that if you're going to say things like that, you say it has to come from the black community? Someone like Rupa Huq, she's Asian, right?
Yeah, but to be fair, if it's offensive, isn't it?
No, I get that, but I think that if we're being totally honest, in the black community, we say things to each other all the time that are not politically correct. You know, that people will call each other, oh, you're a bounty, you're this, you're that. It's a ratchet place to be, you know, there's a lot that goes on.
I never thought I'd heard the word ratchet.
No, but it's true. Everybody, I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but I'm sure that we've all grown up hearing these things. This is not a far-fetched, crazy concept that she said it. But I think that the problem was that it was an Asian woman saying it, and you're not part of the black community. So how do you speak on things like that?
Yeah, so what you're describing is intra-communal regulation. That even when we might call somebody a bounty or so, in our community, if you're calling somebody a bounty by virtue of the way they speak, you sound like an idiot by doing so. But if you're calling somebody like, say, a bounty or whatever other term we might use or so, because they are collaborating with racism, that is legitimate intra-communal regulation. That is a legitimate form of political critique in a bid to make you improve your behavior and stop harming us. And I think that under the law or so in this country, it's very, very careful. You have to be very, very careful because the law will actually, again, the law in this country often tends to overfavor racism than the victims of racism. So you could, if you're not careful, find yourself dragged up in court.
Okay, we're going to move on very briefly. Do you want to have a final point on that?
I was just going to say that my opinion is kind of twofold on it, because Kwasi Kwarteng saying that the Windrush scandal was not racist, like that's obviously stupid.
It's collaborating with racism.
That is collaborating, but then on the other side, my stepdad, he stood as a Conservative MP, and he also he might be one of those that you might be saying is collaborative, and I've seen the hate that he's got from the black community in some ways, but then also he's done incredible things for black progression in society. Like he was the first black farmer in the UK. His sausages and that.
He was on Question Time the other day.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, I wouldn't say that about your stepdad. It's like
Okay.
No, because your stepdad's politics are actually fairly close to mine. Actually, I've read his interviews back in the day. We admire similar people. On Question Time the other day, I've long liked your stepdad. Okay. But the key thing here is that your stepdad does not try and harm us. Neither does Adam Afriyie. Neither does Helen Grant, who are both Tory MPs. There's so many of them who don't try and harm us, and some of them actually leverage their position as black people in the Conservative Party to empower black people. And there are those who it's not just like you join the Conservative Party, you're a bounty. It doesn't work like that. It's like
I would disagree with you on that. I'm sorry for your stepdad.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Absolutely. Tell us my love and my well wishes. Yeah.
When he was in that Question Time, I think Brian Cox was on it as well, and I love him. He's an amazing actor. But I think he was saying, Liz Truss has made mistakes, people don't make mistakes. I would argue that him saying that is actually facilitating more damage to our community by not holding these people account and letting them get away with so-called mistakes, and then all of us are suffering for them. Why do they get to do this?
True, but I haven't watched the Question Time, so I can't really endorse my Question Time that performance. But yeah,
that's what he was saying, and he's defending these people who should have gone, who shouldn't even have been given the chance to run this country in the first place. So for people to, take it as a mistake, that's damaging. That's extremely damaging. I think that's equally as damaging as saying send everybody to Rwanda right now.
It's an ideological position, because some people would say that, I'm not saying this is correct, and my stepdad wouldn't either, but some people believe in trickle-down economics. They think that will help the black people in the community or any other ethnically diverse people. Obviously a fallacy, but some people have purely believe that, and so they might think their intentions might be pure in saying those things. And also in terms of Liz Truss, like there are different ideological points around her. I think, especially talking to my stepdad, has made me realise that like it's not all black and white. Like a lot of the policies that Labour is potentially might impose are not going to particularly help black people either.
But we're creeping towards fascism if we're not already there, you know, and your stepdad is one of 2 black farmers in the UK. I think that kind of makes my point here, that if we're going to talk about trickle-down economics and how that's going to help black people, the Tory government has been in charge for the last 12 years. Yeah. What have they not done? I think your stepdad should be looking and going, why aren't there more farmers like me?
Yeah, he does. So actions speak louder than words for me, and he's literally brought so many black young farmers into the industry. He did a whole Channel 4 documentary about where he brought black people from disadvantaged backgrounds onto the farm, and it was kind of like an apprentice thing. He does loads, but also the church owns like, I don't know, 90%, I want to say, of the land in Britain. And so that's the main thing, and that's what he campaigns against all the time, to get rid of the church ownership of the land, because he's saying that back in Jamaica, where he comes from, there are all of these people who were originally farmers, and now lots of black people are clustered in cities, not necessarily what they were doing back home, but because the church owns the land.
But it's not affecting white people as much, is it, this idea, well, not an idea, but the fact that the church owns the land, because there's so many white farmers, aren't there?
The church is white, yeah.
Well, that's the problem, and if he was really, I'm not saying that he doesn't care, obviously, about black farmers, but I think that, is he prepared to then bring that to Liz Truss and say, listen, girl, we've got to sort this out, or is he going to say, actually, she keeps making mistakes, it's all good, you know, give her a chance, would you? So that, yeah.
Let's get to the final.
One final thing. Your stepdad makes the best sausages in Britain. No innuendo in there too, but yeah, absolutely.
He's biased.
I know. You know what it is, right? I think
he's trying to climb to the top.
He's a former BBC guy. Went through. I read his story, and I thought, this guy's basically me. He was run through the mill also and everything else, thrown out the other side. Went out, was a marketing guy, and then pretty much came up with a brilliant idea, and here he is today or so. And I do admire that. I do admire when I see people have an idea, put it into action. There's nothing more beautiful than seeing people come out the other end of it, even if they do join the Conservative Party, which, again, I say we don't have a problem with.
This has been the Conversation Unscripted. You've been listening to Nels Abbey, Melissa Sigodo, Troy Townsend, and Isla Loness. We are back next month. We'll have another round table for you. We hope you can join us. Follow us at The Conversation. It's been a show produced by the Blakademik.